So, hello everyone. Welcome to this round table. My name is Tatjana König. I'm a member of the executive board of the Körber Foundation in Hamburg, and very happy to host this session today, which is about new batteries for Europe's Green New Deal. And I'm sitting here with Professor Clare Grey. I will introduce her later. We can all witness the climate change and now the climate crisis, and COP26 is in the media on a daily basis. And I would have thought that the topic of battery storage would be very much present at the COP26. I thought that conference would be the moment to talk about new energy infrastructure and all the potential battery research has, and influence it can possibly have on that topic. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm disappointed. I haven't seen much of the topic actually, and that's a question I would like to discuss later with Clare Grey. How can we put battery storage more on the agenda, and what is necessary in the basic research on the one hand, but also for us in Europe, if you want to change the agenda concerning energy storage and energy infrastructure. And the moment I met Clare Grey this year was the Körber Prize award, because she got the Körber Prize for European Science this year. But I want to start with saying Clare Grey is a professor at Cambridge University. She's a Royal Society researcher, and she's really a world leader in the field of basic battery research in battery materials and the NMR technology. She's also, and I like that a lot, co-founder and chief scientist of Niable Limited, a battery fast charging company founded in 2020. So she's not only practicing or doing basic research, she's also doing the, putting it into practice and trying to apply it. Clare believes that to achieve climate goals, it is very important that basic research into new battery technology is already in full swing today and not tomorrow. And I would like to ask you, Clare, when you start with your presentation, to let us know what basic research in your field is all about, what it needs, and what it needs in the European context. Because as the European Körber Prize for Science was awarded to Clare, not only for her basic research, but also for her future projects. It's a prize which has been introduced more than 30 years ago at the Cold War time, because our founder, Kurt Körber, believed very much that science is not about national aspirations, but it's something where, all the countries, especially in Europe, should come together in their effort to advance innovation in society. So even though we haven't got the Cold War times anymore, despite the fact that at the Falling Walls conference we're always reminded of the fact that we had this phase, I do wonder, what do we need in Europe as far as basic research in the field of batteries is concerned? And do we need to have a new approach, working together and also defining European research as something with own values in the world, especially looking at China and the United States? So, Clare, the floor is yours. I'm very happy that you're here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatjana. Thank you for the lovely introduction. So I was asked to maybe spend 10 minutes just reflecting on the state of the field and what batteries... Well, I turned it around to ask the question, what can batteries do for the environment, and how can they meet the 2050 goals? So, as Tatjana mentioned, I'm talking tomorrow on breaking the walls, and there I'm going to talk about fast-charging batteries. So I'm not going to talk so much about that today. And I'm also going to give a science presentation later on this afternoon. So I'll go over some of that again. But right now I just want to give a sort of overview of the battery scene. And to really ask the question, in not necessarily in my talk, but in debate, as to how we develop a strategy both at the European level and the global level for technologies that don't actually exist today. So the challenge is we all need a roadmap, we all need a way to see our way forward to 2050, but there are key parts that are still missing from that roadmap. And so how do we develop that strategy? So I came back from COP26 yesterday and was very lucky to hear Al Gore give a very empowering talk where he just basically threw image after image, and I've stolen them all from his talk, so totally acknowledge that, of just the scene of destruction caused by climate change. And I don't need to reiterate that here, but I think he also ended his talk in a more optimistic set than normal, with the sense that there were technologies, and technologies were making progress, and we've seen the dramatic decrease in prices of solar and wind, and even batteries are decreasing now by more than a factor of 30 since they weren't invented. So that gives us a realistic prospect of actually making an impact. And so in that context, I just wanted to talk through that a little bit. And so we all know why batteries are important. They're important for electrification of transport, in order to use renewables and lower zero, not to burn fossil fuels. But I think one of the challenges that we have to address is what are we going to do with storage on the grid? So if we want to increase the use of renewables on the grid, we also need to be able to store. Now, there are two strategies that, and I think when there are multiple strategies here, we have to adopt all of these strategies. But given the reduction in price in wind and solar, we can massively ramp up the amount of renewables on the grid. And that means that maybe we need to store less if we do the right sort of interconnection. But that sounds easy, except for the fact to make that happen, we need to be building 10 times more than we are projected to do right now. It's a massive scale. We need a grid that's 2 times larger than today's grid, or 3 times larger if we don't do that in a smart way. So that's a massive infrastructure project. And batteries can contribute if we can push their ability to go from short-term storage to long-term storage by just a small amount. And if we increase the amounts of microgrids, not just in Europe, but around the world. So just to put the science context here, I think it's important to appreciate that the current lithium-ion battery technology is very close to its fundamental limit. And so there's a sort of belief that if we keep on doing research, batteries will get better. But I think you need to appreciate that a battery contains a certain amount of stuff, and the stuff then dictates how many electrons you can get out of it. So no amount of research is going to improve it. We can do work on reducing battery degradation, which is one of the topics I work on, and that's very important from a sustainability perspective because the batteries last longer. We don't need to be buying more batteries. We need to think about how we recycle them. But we also need to think outside the box. And it's sort of this sort of outside the box thinking to make technologies like lithium air, lithium sulfur, magnesium batteries work that's the real challenge. I just wanted to, I'll just spend a few more minutes on this, then I'll draw this section to a close, but I do think we need to think about this from a sustainability perspective. You know, there's all the talk about the gigafactories that are being built. 45 gigafactories are in progress at the moment. They will require the daily production of cobalt from the DRC, and cobalt has so many issues associated with it. And even if you push and you start removing cobalt like the electric vehicles are, nickel is now becoming an issue. Nickel is found in steel, and so that correlates with steel prices. And then even lithium has water resource issues in, for example, the Atacama Desert, where it's found in Chile. So we can discuss all of these things. We can discuss ways to reduce cost. We can talk about battery degradation. and ways to increase energy density. I just want to just touch on a few things. Lithium, beyond lithium, sodium-ion batteries will be important, magnesium-ion batteries will be important, and then in terms of research, we need to get these paradigm-shifting technologies to work, from lithium-sulfur to lithium-air, and solid-state batteries from a safety perspective. So I've thrown all of these different battery technologies at you. I can't possibly unpick them all. Happy to do so, but I might be here for another 40 minutes. But we need to do things sustainably. So with that, I think I'll just conclude and say there's a lot of room for different technologies, but the challenges are huge. And we also need to rethink how we make a battery. We need to design a battery up front so it can be recycled. And that has some very difficult implications on removing fluorine from the battery, different electrolytes, and so that becomes a challenge. I think I'm going to stop now and just open the floor for discussion if you'd like, or I can continue, but it's up to you. Is that for the moment?
No, looking at the clock, which is ticking, I think it'd be great if we start the discussion, and then maybe if there are some questions which need you to go further, then you could do that. An organizational remark to start with. If you'd like to use, you should use the microphone which is standing up here, because the round table is live streamed, and otherwise the viewers outside won't be able to hear you. And if you kindly leave on your mask when you're standing at the microphone, because this way we don't have to decontaminate it each time somebody's standing there. So as you know, we're sitting here so far. Are there already any questions or topics you like to delve into to start with? Everyone's overwhelmed because this challenge is so big, and I think that's one of the questions. And Claire, we talked about that today. Oh, is there a question? Okay, Marius Brandt. So you would like to go to the microphone and ask a question, because otherwise nobody will be able to hear.
Good day, my name is Marius Brandt. I'm from Sasol, South Africa.
And could you leave your mask on?
I'll leave my mask on.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
So just thanks for the presentation, Claire, and I think it's quite interesting. I think a lot of the challenges we've seen around battery at scale and also in the developing countries is obviously the cost associated. And we have not seen really big uptake in mobility, etc., from developing countries in terms of taking, especially on EVs and so forth. You did raise that. I think there's quite a lot of research, but it seems to me the impact is not getting big step changes. Where would you see the big step changes come? Have you considered things more to the chemical side? I mean, are there other areas that you feel could require support to explore further? Thank you.
So I think with the battery price coming down, that's when we're going to, in terms of the electric vehicle market, that's when we're starting to see step changes. And I think the push away from nickel into the lithium iron phosphate technologies, that's already pushing in. And so that's something that Tesla is pushing, but also a lot of companies in China. And for me also, the push in many parts of the world has been on range and range anxiety. But I personally think we need to rethink that and make smaller batteries that are more sustainable. And what's interesting is if you look at the game sort of 15 years ago when we were developing plug-in hybrids, the language was all about 100 kilometers, 60 kilometers. That's what most people, in America do every day. But I mean, most of the world doesn't even do 60 kilometers drives a day. Most of the world's are smaller commutes. So I think we need to rethink that type of battery and have a lot of cars or transport around with inherently smaller and cheaper batteries. And also be upfront and recognize that not everybody is going to have the 300-mile range car because most of the world can't afford it. And then we also have to rethink the whole charging infrastructure and how are we going to charge the world? I mean, you look around here, for example, how is everybody going to be able to charge their car? So I'm not really answering your question, but I think we have to recognize that if you're going to electrify the world, it's not going to look, we're not going to be driving the same sort of car. It's going to be, and Tata tried to introduce, again, 10, 15 years ago, a very small car for about £2,000 or $2,000, and that was almost too early. But I think that's the type of car that's going to have to become possible, along with more car sharing models. And we're seeing bicycle sharing models, scooter sharing models. You know, that's going to have to become more omnipresent and moving away. And this is Germany, where, you know, owning a car is sort of part of the way that for many you were this sort of a status symbol. But forget status symbols. Status symbols in a global warming world are just an irrelevancy. We need new status symbols, I think.
Any other questions from the floor? Yes, please.
Hi. You ended the presentation on a note of the need to design for recycling. And in these kind of new paradigm shifted batteries, what does circularity look like? And is it only at the end of life of a battery that we can be thinking circular and how to pull materials out? Or are there reuse cycles and new ways to kind of use and deploy batteries that you're thinking of in this future?
It's a great question, and it's really one where actually a lot more work needs to go in. One of the challenges we have at the moment is that the electrolyte, so the liquid where the ions move in, contains this fluorine salt, LiPF6, and when that reacts with water, it generates HF and toxic gases, and those are also associated with a lot of the risks in battery fires. And I think we need a pathway to remove that, whether it's through regulation ultimately. But the trouble with that, you also have to have the science that goes along with it. And there are routes, but again, it comes down to compromises in terms of the voltages a battery might establish. So I think new electrolytes are very important. On the anode, we've already got rid of the fluorine components. On the cathode, getting to high voltages while removing the fluorine is challenging right now. I don't know the solution, but I think that's sort of got to happen. And then you've got to think about the more modularity and the ease of taking things apart. And so, again, these are advanced manufacturing methods that are going to have to go into it. So it's got to happen. And I say the electrolyte's the first thing that's got to go. The salt in the electrolyte, you've got to have the electrolyte. The second thing is more monitoring is something that I'm very supportive of, partly because I'm a physical scientist, so I'm sort of biased here, but actually watching what's happening to your battery so that you can modify the way you use it to allow it to last longer. Then you can also sell it with more confidence to the next user, knowing that it's not going to sort of fall off a cliff, it's going to have a second life. But ultimately, there's got to be the whole life cycle. It's got to be costed into how that battery is sold. And it's challenging because you want to get that battery into the marketplace as quickly as possible because you want it to be cheaper for the consumer. But actually, if that consumer in that price can also sell it on, then maybe there's cost savings there too. But, I mean, there's some specific chemistry things that we need to be working on. There's some specific manufacturing things that we need to be working on. And there's specific monitoring things that we need to be working on. All of that has to come together, and the regulation and the costing to make a more sustainable world. So, yeah. And I think also one of the difficulties for a chemist like myself is, in terms of the recycling, is that the chemistry is changing. So sort of designing different processes becomes difficult because we haven't all locked into one technology. But, you know, we are lucky that there's a lot of funding in some ways in this field, so we can maybe afford to think generally about how one does science more generally to do these types of things, and I think that's important. Another thing that becomes difficult is that, at least from the academic, is that there are many companies, of which, you know, I'm part of that game too, using different additives, different things that we don't know about. So we have to sort of invent recycling almost blind, because there are different salts in these batteries that impact the way they're recycling. And so, for example, people put coatings on batteries, and the nature of those coatings will mean that there are different ways to recycle them. So in this dream world, we also have to be more transparent about what's in there, to sort of, so that the poor workers who are not doing the recycling don't get this random battery with something very different in it. And then if we can also push in, again, it's not, I don't believe it's a dream world, to inherently more safer technologies, then there are less risks of fires when these batteries are taken apart. But again, that comes back to maybe compromising on the range of these batteries that we're going to have. You know, they may not be as perfect as we'd like in other ways, but more sustainable.
Yes, please. Could you introduce yourself first? Thank you.
Thank you. Javier López Bartolomé. I come from Spain. I've been in the past director of a mining company, and I know mining in the Congo Democratic Republic is not easy, or is not possible sometimes, okay? My question comes, I've seen many promises, many commitments, many politicians that are saying after 2030, perhaps in Europe we will not sell any more cars with a combustion engine, only electric cars.
Yep.
And then when I hear about the technologies, they all look to be in development. They are not yet fully developed, fully operational, fully, let me say, adjusted. The question, are we ready really to, just 8 years from today, build the right infrastructure in manufacturing, in stability of the products, in sizing and scalability of batteries, for example, in order to go ahead and then keep our promises, or is that an issue? Because politicians, and apologies if anybody's here, sometimes make promises that are really difficult to deliver, yeah? And the question is if in this case, because it is a real application, because it is something which is real life of everybody, we need to be careful with these promises and adjust them to the level of development that we're going to have in each of the products that are needed to make this revolution, let's say.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. So there's a lot of questions in there. I want to just touch on a number of points. You said you were from a mining company, and I think I started off by saying mining of cobalt is bad. I think, but there are a lot of challenges about that. I mean, in the whole community in cobalt, there are a lot of indigenous populations whose life relies on it. And so as we sort of immediately say no cobalt, you also have to think all the way through. And I think one of the challenges in this field is we have to think through the whole supply chain. And there are actually very few industries where actually the person making the battery is almost required to understand the whole way down, right down to the mining. And so that's a challenge in itself. But in terms of your question, are we ready? The standard lithium-ion battery is absolutely ready. It's fit for purpose, but it is expensive. And so I think actually the bigger challenge for hitting that 2030 agenda is charging. How do we put the charging points in for all of Europe to charge not just the people who happen to have street parking or guaranteed street parking or garages or forecourts or have a place in work. So to me, that's the bigger challenge. And speaking from a UK perspective, that's been pushed onto the councils. And the councils are coming out of a pandemic, underfunded. You know, how are they necessarily going to be able to do all that? So I think we need a much more stronger national program or European program to make that happen. But I think it's not a useful language to say that the batteries aren't ready. I think that they are coming down. We're seeing cars becoming much cheaper, but it's how do we make them available for the larger population? I think that's sort of the challenge. I believe that if we don't regulate now, we're not going to put in place what's needed for 2030. And I think the first thing we need to do is to think about that charging network and think really creatively about how we're going to do that. And you know, I'm not a very good salesperson for my company, but we are trying to think about ways that you could do fast charging to help, like little robots that go and charge so that you're not locked into charging points, so that there's more mobility and different ways of charging. Robots that come to you and charge. Now that's not possible for 300-mile ranges, but it is possible if you get stuck on the street over there and you need to be rescued. So I think there's a lot of creative stuff to go. We've got, we are 8.5 years from 2030. So if we don't start doing it now, when are we going to do it?
So next question, and then Carlo Rizzuto afterwards.
Yeah, hello, my name is Rudolf Freitag. I'm working with Siemens. I would like to put the battery in a bit broader perspective, because, I mean, one topic certainly is ramping up the renewable energy as a major source. So due to the fluctuation and then the timing, basically energy storage in a broader sense is the important issue in order to really ramp that up. So I'm wondering, what is the role of batteries in that energy storage? Because this is definitely a very different scale we are talking about. We talked about cost, about efficiencies, about all that stuff. So I'm wondering how to solve that problem, energy storage, to stabilize the storage in the grid, and what role play the batteries, and what type of innovation do we still need in order to solve that even bigger storage stabilization problem?
So that's, to me, that's the multi-million or trillion-dollar question, or euro question. So the battery, if you look at the sizes of storage, and we think about hydroelectric dams, and we know that a battery, is 1/3 of the energy density of so that's the size. Sorry, it's 3 times better. Your batteries are going to be sizes of hydroelectric dams. And then you think about, what are the sustainability issues of, even if you could build those things, does it make sense? And the answer is no. So then what do you do? So there are 2 strategies. I said you either massively overbuild wind and solar, and then you have more interconnections. That comes with the cost issue. I think that batteries, the traditional battery, will play a role as cost comes down in balancing the grid, frequency regulation, short-term sustainability, and those are important because the intermittency issues, the stability, the grid, the security on the grid, all of these things become much more important as more renewables go on. How do we then get to the next step, which is your question? Then this is my belief. It's not belief that everybody believes. I think there's going to have to be more chemical energy storage. And so that's going to be the excess of wind and solar is going to be converted into a fuel. The language is often hydrogen, ammonia as well, but I'm hopeful that it will be some alternative energy vector, that we will have a system where the fuel cell is a battery, so we can go backwards and forwards. The energy vector may be a hydrocarbon that is reversible. And I think that's where the science has to be, in rethinking what the energy vector is that allows us to do large-scale grid storage. I work on redox flow batteries, so these are bigger batteries where we're pumping and I'm sure you obviously know in Siemens, but for those in the audience who are not so familiar with this technology, this is the idea that you have a large tank of oxidized liquid and reduced liquid, and you flow them into an electrochemical cell when you want to get your electricity. And what that does is it decouples the energy generation from the storage, and so you can have a small battery but big tanks. Now that works, but they're still no cheaper than lithium ion. But I do think there is a trajectory for them where they could be cheaper. Will they replace hydroelectricity? I doubt it. But it's that whole combination of doing, and one of my colleagues in Cambridge says, stop this discussion, just get on with it. You've got to electrify everything. Maybe that's naive, but I do believe we have to push, and more and more wind, more and more solar, much faster than we're doing, will change the dynamics on all of this. And so, what price intermittency is the biggest challenge, I think. Yeah, but so all of the above is the answer.
Okay, Carlo Rizzuto.
Carlo Rizzuto from Italy. Okay, part of the question was already answered because it was a question that I was going to make. But also within the grid, how far are we from the final type of grid that we need, first. And second, discharging the car batteries in the grid as a future or not? I mean, because after all, this could be really stabilize the grid in the shorter environment.
Yeah. So I used to think that the car on the grid was an irrelevancy, and I was also concerned by the extra charge-discharge cycles that would then give to your car and the increased degradation. I'm now not so convinced. I think that for some of us who would buy a car that we wouldn't use as much, so I'm in Cambridge, I bicycle, so I don't use the car very much, then actually there isn't a mechanism of paying for some of that battery by using it on the grid, which I think may be helpful for some consumers. But I also think that the grid, unless we're smart about it, is going to have to be so much bigger. So I think that cars will play a role, but then that comes back to safety, increasing the safety of the battery. And if people are cycling their cars inside their garages, in their homes, it doesn't take very many safety incidents to worry the populace. So I think that the batteries in terms of degradation have been much better than people had predicted, including people like me. So I think that's less of a worry. I think there's a cost advantage, and I think it'll also mean that the grid will be smarter. So I think there is a future for them, but I think safety and monitoring in real time so that you see whether there's heating that was not expected or signatures that something is not what it should be. And so you're told, you're woken up. It'll be woken up at 3 a.m. and told to move your car out the garage and that sort of thing, or shut it down, or building in. And this is where, again, chemists can play an important role, shutting down batteries so that you stop the fire and stop the incident. But again, all of these mechanisms come at the penalty of energy density. So if you put a membrane in your battery to do that, you have less room for something else. So, yeah. But these are all things that we have to do. We have to throw every single thing at this, unfortunately. Yeah. And I think people like me can be accused of being naive, and I'm happy to be naive. It's fine. But I think at this point we don't have a clear roadmap, and we need to be transparent about that. And that means that we have to look at all of these different options. And maybe 10 years from now, we'll be in this boat, and this will have been seen to be the stupidest thing. But at the moment, we can't afford to make those decisions. I think we have to look at every single option.
Any more questions? So Claire, if you'd have a wish, or two wishes free, naive wishes or not, what do you think, what would you wish from especially Europe as an area of basic research and infrastructure? What would you like to change if you could do it as a fairy,
Well, my wishes are very self-centered. I think we need to, in terms of your original questions were about the research arena in Europe, and I think we're very lucky that there's a lot of focus on this there, and there's a lot of funding, but I think we need more mechanisms for long-term funding so that people are able to think a little bit more outside the box, and we have the confidence to allow people to think outside the box, but at the same time, we can't afford to waste money. So it is taxpayers' money, and so there has to be a thinking outside the box with a view on the future. And that's not an easy program to put in place. I would like more discussions on regulations, but also very much science-driven regulations with more involvement of scientists to sort of map that out. And I would just personally like to wish that we come up with an energy vector that looks like a fossil fuel but isn't a fossil fuel, that is reversible. But that's what I'm working on, is rethinking that. So maybe not the best answer, but an answer. And also my naivety, I think I would just like to hope that people do appreciate that technology will enable a lot of things, but it's not going to solve everything. I think we also have to recognize that our lives may look different, and but there'll also be some interesting things about the new lives, and to embrace that as well. And so I think that the next generation is that people's lives are not all about have cars. So those are my thoughts at the moment. I can continue, though, if you wish.
Well, I mean, we're here at the Falling Walls conference, at the Falling Walls Science Summit, and we're here in a very international crowd and community, and it's not all about Europe, and it's not all about science. It's also representatives, from industry, from the arts, from society, and how do you value interdisciplinary work? Because that's, I know, a topic at the Falling Walls Summit every year. How can we get the right teams, the right people together, thinking about these very fundamental challenges, and how do you approach in your daily work the factor of interdisciplinarity, and also involving regions in the world which are not sort of the Ivy League and first world countries?
Yeah, I think this is one of the most interdisciplinary areas in terms of just the science, from the chemistry through to the understanding, through to the engineering to make it work. But it's also a massive global activity, and I think we can't afford to deny that. We can't just say this is a European-focused activity. All of the manufacturing for the last few years has been largely done in Asia, and it's much cheaper. And we look at my own company. We've come up with what we're trying to do, just in a nutshell, is to sort of rethink charging. If you could charge faster, then you wouldn't have to have such a large battery. You could have a smaller battery that goes off, does its job, and it comes back to be charged. And so inherently, that could be a more sustainable battery. But that comes with it a lot of things that need to be done. But you move from a lab design through to manufacturing, and that manufacturing is cheaper in Asia. So we have to think about how we do that. And it's all very well saying we want it to be done local, but if the consumer then has to be willing to pay for that increase in price. So I'm not sure I have the answer to that question, but in terms of from the academic perspective, I think that the interdisciplinary part is the exciting part, because that's where it makes you rethink what you're doing. And I think if you sit in your lab only thinking about the new chemistry, but if you come at it from a perspective of what does the overcharging do? What does the heating? How could we manage the heating aspects? Then that makes you think differently about your science, and that's how you get into sort of new areas. So to me, that's part of the excitement as well.
Any other questions before we move on? I just didn't want to stop anyone. Okay, because when you were just saying that so much of the development production is happening in Asia, during the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about, do we need more technological sovereignty? And it seems to be just, the other side of what we are seeing right now, that everyone works very much together, and that technology is developed in completely different parts of the world and is then used in Europe. How does that come together?
So I'm not 100% sure on your question, but do we need technology sovereignty? Well, I think the reason why a lot of these gigafactories are being built in Europe is that one of the difficulties, of course, of batteries is shipping them, so they have to be made local, combined with the European regulations for local sourcing and local, and then adding value locally. So that's obviously very important. In terms of your question,
well, what I meant is that obviously, during the pandemic, everybody quite acutely felt and witnessed how interdependent, our relations are, no matter whether it's in the industry, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's technology. And then there are these voices saying, okay, we have to be completely independent from the United States, from China. We have to do it all in Europe. And I think in a way that's wishful thinking, because the reality looks so different. But I'm not even sure that if we could change it and do a turnaround in that, whether it would actually help, in particular developing new approaches, which in the end have to be global approaches.
Yeah, so I'm going to turn that around slightly. I think that we have to do a lot of this locally, partly because we need to get the local communities to recognise that going green isn't necessarily about a loss. I mean, there will be changes in standards of living, but it's not about loss of standards of living. And also that the green economy is not just for an elite. The green economy means that there are new jobs. And in order to electrify Europe and the world, we're going to have to, the person repairing the internal combustion engine is going to lose their job in the next 20 years. So we need to be retraining everybody from all the way down from the kindergarten to the next level up in this new industry. And so I think it is important to think locally to get everybody involved in the green revolution and to move away from the fact that the green revolution is only for those who can afford Teslas. And so there's a massive retraining that's going to be needed. And it could be really exciting. And so we need to turn that language around to it being exciting. But then having said that, it is also the developing world that needs to be empowered. And we need to get that financing for them to make that happen. And yet we need to, the standard of, the education systems in parts of Africa, the levels of entrepreneurship are very different. And we somehow need to be able to help enable different parts of the world to make those transitions. And it's not just in finance, but it's also building communities and education to make that happen. So we can be local, I think it's important, but we also need to be global. And I think without that global aspect, then it's not going to work as well. So I don't think it's the time to be shutting down the filters and just saying we do this everything in Europe, because for climate change is global. So local is about empowering local populace to get on board and to be educated. And I'm not trying to say this in any sort of patronizing way, but to sort of recognize the opportunities. But we also need to be global to enable much larger fractions of this world to be able to come with us.
Thank you. I think that was a very good final summary of what lies ahead of us. Thank you very much, Claire, for your time, and you all for your interest and for your questions. And Falling Walls is all about being very punctual. So I see at the monitor we have 23 seconds left, and before any sort of noises come up trying to stop us. Thank you very much, and we're ending at this, and very much looking forward to your talk tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.